What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and today on Homebrewed Christianity, you get to hear a conversation with my friend Aaron Stauffer. He's one of the coordinators for the Wendland-Cook Program in Religion and Justice at Vanderbilt, a regular partner with Jörg Rieger there, and he has a brand new book, Listening to the Spirit. It's a good one. It's not just a book thinking about theology and activism and justice. It's also looking at the history of the way faith has inspired activism and movement politics. And in addition, it thinks about how we do that, bring that energy to faith-based inspired activism in a contemporary context. He explores the concept of sacred value, of broad-based community organizing, and a kind of a transformation of sorts, the social gospel from a time when America was dominated culturally by the church to a time in which there are multiple religious traditions, and then people who share the deep values of religious traditions that don't belong to one. And so he's not just a theorist of this stuff, but on the ground working at it through the Wendland-Cook Program and his own kind of working with movement politics and such. So it was quite a joy to get to talk to him a little while back, and now I get to share it with you. One thing that I really want to emphasize, well, actually two. One is Wendland-Cook Center for Religion and Justice are one of the sponsors this year for Theology Beer Camp, October 17th to 19th in Denver, Colorado. theologybeer.camp if you want to check it out. And one of the things that they're doing is actually bringing a part of their work at bringing together local community organizers, faith communities, faith leaders, and the resources of movement politics and organizing to make a difference on the ground. They're going to be bringing that to camp to help us think about what it would be like to put in action, right? A lot of the theological reflection about God's desire for the world. What would it be like to organize and connect and build community that does that today? And one of the expressions of that is their solidarity circles. We've talked about it maybe a year or two ago on the podcast when Jörg Rieger was on, and we talked about it. And I know quite a few of you joined a solidarity circle that they facilitate. It's like a 9-month training program, and in it, you have like virtual meetings, and it's like a small group kind of thing. You have like your virtual meetings, you get in dialogue and such, and then they bring together different kind of practical trainings. So people that are faith leaders or community leaders are able to align the work they're doing with like a deep solidarity for those who need allies, support, amplification in their own community. So it brings together like thinking theologically in a deep contextual way in the present, like understanding the experience on the ground through a theological lens. But then it also helps do leadership development, like what are the best practices for getting, say, a faith community to coalesce around a challenge in their community and get involved and act out in ways that partner with those around doing it, or amplify the right places, or come alongside, or take leadership. It helps you learn how to do that. That leadership development part, both within your place of service and abroad, it generates relationships, a support network, and you're able to kind of work towards practical outcomes. Solidarity circles, the moment I heard about it, I was excited. And then over the last few years, quite a few of you who listen to the podcast have done it, from people in cities to rural areas, people at small congregations to larger ones, to faith-based nonprofits. And I've consistently heard that it's not just an amazing training program, it's a great place to find friends who don't just want to think about a difference in the world, but to have relationships and accountability and resources, coaching to do it. So if you're interested in checking out the solidarity circles and joining up, the next round I think starts, or the applications close up, I think the 16th of August. Then go to religionandjustice.org. That is their website, and it's aptly named. All right? And then remember, you can get to meet them, both Jörg and Aaron and Gabby and some of the other people at the Wendland-Cook will all be at Theology Beer Camp this year in October. There'll be cool sessions and stuff, but also small group times where if you want to kind of explore solidarity circles and what it looks like, the way you tell narratives, the way you build community. Anyway, there's going to be some really cool elements they're bringing this year that I'm excited about to make the event not just head heavy, but hand heavy, like, putting into action. You'll hear why. You'll hear why I'm excited when you hear Aaron and I talk about his new book, along with excurses, because we were having lots of fun and it was rather late. All right? Now, before I jump in, I'm going to remind you, if you want ad-free versions of all the podcast episodes, you could go to processthis.substack.com. The Process This newsletter, that's my Substack. It also includes all ad-free versions of the podcast, sometimes bonus ones, sometimes extended edition ones. And for like $80 for the entire year, you get no ads, support the podcast, interact with the community. You can do cool stuff like hang out with Ilya Dilio and I talking about AI and Teilhard Desjardins. You can do that. That's coming up in August. Or we're going to do our big wrap-up on the big AI series with Kester Bruin, be a live Q&A and stuff with members of the Process This Substack. Come on. I'm just saying. It helps me do all the stuff I'm doing that you obviously enjoy if you're here. And we get to interact and relate more. So boom shakalaka, processthis.substack.com. And if you want to access all the old classes from Homebrew, 40 some of them, theologyclass.com. Anyway, here we go. Aaron Stauffer, and we're going to have ourselves a good time right now and at camp. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and today on the podcast, Aaron Stauffer, author of Listening to the Spirit, The Radical Social Gospel, Sacred Value, and Broad-Based Community Organizing. Very excited to have you. And in case the video does come out, here's the book.
Yeah.
So I should have to reverse the camera in order for people to read it, but it's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's one of the things somebody asked me the other day what I'm most proud of about the book, and I said the cover. It's fun.
Why? Because that's the only thing you didn't have to revise multiple times. Someone else did it.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to. I was just kind of like, all right, here we go.
I want some birds.
Seriously, I said, give me something around murmuration, movements of the spirit. That's what it is.
So one thing, this comes out of the work you were doing on your PhD at Union Theological Seminary with Gary Dorian. So this book, which blends kind of political theology, on-the-ground activism, and reflecting on it, and trying to address our current predicament of religion, politics, economics. This is both like your nerd area and your faith passion area, and like where you were pouring your time as a person activist. So like this book is near and dear to you. So like, what does it feel like not knowing what questions I'm about to ask, and you have to like answer for your passion of your faith, your nerdy engagement, and like your deepest commitments to material reality through your activism?
Oh man, I'm a wreck. I don't know. Yeah, I'm bearing my soul. No, it is real. Like that, I think that's what makes like anything that you write really valuable. I mean, maybe you know this about your own writing too, is that like it comes from your experience, which has propelled you to follow questions deeper into things that you become more invested in, and then you find other people who are super interested in, so that builds more relationships, and it just like kind of snowballs. So then you have to cut some of it out in order to make a book. But yeah, I was really happy to be able to give you this, because I kind of hoped like, Trip, yeah, you can hang with the nerds, right? This is great. I'm not afraid to give you like a chapter on Hegel. Like you've read it, like you can do it, and it's not like you can or cannot, but like it is a distinct sort of book here. It does a lot of different things, and not everybody has to read everything. Like there are some chapters that are just written for organizers, and there are some chapters that are just written for church folk. So yeah, I'm a wreck, but I'm glad that it's you.
Well, no, I'm excited, not just for the conversation, because we're going to get to hang out at Theology Beer Camp. That's and right. When the origin story for the Solidarity Circles comes up, make sure you say something, because, months from now, all you listeners, there's, the 300 of you that already got your beer camp tickets, and the others that are getting it, you'll have the opportunity to connect for some Solidarity Circle action in person. Also, they can sign up and do it online. But what's funny is Solidarity Circles makes even more sense to me after reading the book.
Really?
Where it's kind of like all three of your big passions had a baby. And, so
that's right.
I think the place I'd like to start, right, like is, let's imagine right now when you think of a person of faith that's sitting there asking questions about democracy and economics. And then they're like, well, what role is religion playing in it? And right now we're going to have this very, very narrow view because it's kicking off election season. Right. And it's so narrow. Apparently both parties can get together to fund what 30% of the country finds interesting.
That's right.
It's that's what we're all worked up about. And underneath this book, In Your Passion, is a picture of democracy, religion, justice that isn't overdetermined by election cycles and their outcomes, and isn't always responding to the kind of the tyranny of the urgent, but wanting to ground in a vision of community and of values and of hope and organizing around it, right? So like it's there in some sense, you've conquered the cynicism that I'm really attracted to right now. So like this is what like knowing like what where people's political minds are right now. How do you understand the present where you give an invitation or a vision of what's possible that kind of goes beyond the cynicism, the urgent, and the election?
Oh, wow. That's great. I mean, a couple things are really important. Yeah. I mean, I think we suffer from electoralitis, right? Just consistent campaigns elections that never end. And that narrows our viewpoints of lenses what we think politics is. So we think it's just about voting. It is, certainly. And it's an important part. But it's also much deeper and broader than that. It's about the sort of communities that we create. And perhaps some of this is because I come from a small town where, my family runs the small town newspaper there and has for like 4 or 5 generations. And so I grew up constantly thinking and having, dinner table conversations around what's going on in a local city, So my sense of self is always formed deeply in connection with a community. And I think anyone who's been a part of a church, like that's what keeps you there. One of the things we first do with the solidarity circles is the first question that we ask of the group is, what does solidarity smell like? And my answer is church basements. Because here's the potluck, here's the Bible studies. This is where everything begins. And in every church basement, well, not everyone, but a lot of them smell the same. And they all look pretty similar.
It depends on how recent the lock-in was.
Yes,
right. Because if there was a recent lock-in, there's a certain pubescent layer.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
there's like the fried chicken grease in the walls. Then
right.
There's like the over-perfumed, elderly stitching group. But if there was a lock-in, there's only one smell to rule them all.
That's right.
And it's puberty.
That's right. No, that's real. So open the windows, let it air out, But it is real. Like it is about like what grounds my sense of what I care most about and what I think really matters. And it's community. It's communities of faith. And I think in order to build them up and actually give them a purpose, this is where the book ends, right? The church. The mission of the church is better identified, and the identity of it is better identified as a task. What work it's called to do. And so it is I'm a social ethicist. I'm concerned about how religion helps us, think and act better, moving from the way that the world is to the way that it ought to be, and how religion can help us out in that way. So that's where I'd engage people, around like, it is true. Well, there's a lot at stake in these national elections, and we need to think about how it is that power shakes up, both in terms of how elections are skewed through big money and big corporations, how your voice is consistently silenced through the electoral college, all sorts of things. But also at the end of the day, things end without reducing politics to the local. Things really start there, and they depend on the local relationships, the local face-to-face work that then scales up. If you're not base building in that way, if you're not building relational networks of power, then you've got nothing to stand on. So start where you are, and that then helps us think about democracy democracy is not a polity, or it's not only a polity. It's a way of life. It's an ethical form of life. It's about, and grounded in the demos, the people, the unruly, right? that people are really that the elite are scared of, and that's where things are really powerful, because and democracy then is that it's about cultivating a democratic way of life where you have more say over your workplace and over your community life. It's about having agency.
And one of the things that I think our horizons get limited by, right? Like when we focus on the election or what's the kind of like the urgent predicament,
Yeah.
right? Is even right there where you're talking about democracy. We tend to think immediate, and then we immediately go national or global.
Exactly.
Right. And you grew up in a small town newspaper family. When you're involved in broad-based community organizing, so often the energy is put towards things you can make a difference on locally. A lot of the work y'all are doing, that you and York are doing, right, is trying to help faith communities, faith-inspired communities develop democratic businesses and communities, right? So where part of expanding democracy isn't just expanding the voter access, eliminating rules. It's also expanding democracy to spheres of life
Amen.
that are inherited structures said, you don't get agency here.
That's right.
All you are is labor.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you were saying that there, but I'd love for you to like, just as a social ethicist, whose faith is animating it, when you hear that the promise of democracy, like what are the places it's unfulfilled where you go like, well, no, like if you're gonna pray the Lord's Prayer and expect the kingdom to be more present because it's come, then democracy has a growth agenda, and it's not just figuring out ballot access.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, like, let's be real, like, we don't really live in a democracy. Like, we don't either an economic or a political democracy, and so it's always sort of aspirational. Like, let's kind of just let's be real about. So it remains unfulfilled in a lot of ways, both politically, economically, and many in the academy too. That maybe was a slip that was meant to be true. But then also even within our religious congregations too. Even within our religious democracy. So I think the way you're talking about it, it makes me think about, like, it remains unfulfilled in almost every way we see. And so when we're drawn to speak about, democracy in aspirational terms, I think of terms like the kingdom of God, the kingdom of God. I think of, like, the social gospel. I think of the cooperative commonwealth. I think about how it is that the birth of the social gospel, the birth of the 20th century, a couple of decades before, like, was all about the recognition that you need to transform the structures of society in the directions of justice. Thanks to it's Gary Dorian's definition, it kind of rolls off your tongue after you've heard him say it several times. But I think that's like it's real. It's about grounding in commitments of faith. It becomes a commitment of faith. Thanks, John Dewey. Right? This how it is that people's conceptions of religion are deeply ethical. So I think when we think about the lack of democracy in politics, I think we think about how it is that you are. I mean, but what is politics really? I mean, politics is not partisanship. Politics is about the contestation of goods that we hold in common. It's about our collective life, our common life together. So in that sense, yeah, we definitely need a whole lot of bridge building in this sense. We need to actually get to know ourselves, the people we think that we hold things in common with, and those that we differ with. Really, we need to do that relational work. But undergirding that, oftentimes, undergirding is the right word, but, like, related to that too is economic democracy. Like, lots of times people, which really means, one way of thinking about this is democratic socialism, but the way that social gospels talked about this, extending democracy to industry. So how is it that workers have say over the production process and the profit? Workers don't have a whole lot of say over it now. Why not? You should. I think that's part of this. But I don't think that I'm not sort of offering here a scale of, like, oh, if we just fix politics, the economics will follow, and if we just fix the economy, the politics will follow too. I think they're deeply related. I think we're in such an interconnected time that you need to do both at the same time. that you can't do one or the other. And so, yeah, I think about this in terms of the kingdom of God, about the cooperative commonwealth, which was a theologically informed way about talking about a collection of worker-owned producer, consumer, and distributor cooperatives at every scale of the economy. That helps us think about how it is that workers democratically own and participate in businesses and have say over where the profit goes, which is not the case now. So it's not a complex, it can, you don't need to be this, friends don't need to, this is not foreign to you. You know the difference between charity and mutual aid, right? There's something between service and then actually being in relationship with each other. This stuff is pretty familiar. So I think about it in terms of social gospel, of a long tradition of Christians actually organizing and seeing the evils in the economy and the evils in politics as familiar to us. Democracy remains unfulfilled in both of those areas, and we need to continue to push in both of those areas.
You know what's fascinating to me when you talk about that notion of it being unfulfilled, right? Like, and this is something, towards the end of his work when Derrida got all these criticisms about deconstruction, and then he kind of, when he takes that religious turn, he talks about the undeconstructible, right? And it's justice, right? And it is like one of the most Jewish prophet moves you get, where like what is on the horizon is something that never arrives, but only because it holds the present to account. Like, and there's like this kind of structure, and it's one that actually exists in the liturgy of the church, right? So when we arrive, you begin with the recognition of the gift of existence, the presence of the divine, and then you actually do confession. And you begin by going like, well, we're very clear on the not yet side of things, right? And then you're sent out, right? So there's a structure. But one of the things that's happened in our democratic system is we have erased in the public square the place for confession, the place for the recognition of what is not yet, right? So like, even if parts of our political tribes will say it, the politicians don't get to do it.
Right.
In fact, they get critiqued if they name their deficit. And then you get, by the majority on each tribe, lambasted if you even like think that it would be nice to, I don't know, like recognize what your tax money is being spent for in Palestine, or like the money you gave to build a wall isn't being spent for. Like, I mean, there's not even like a partisan thing. It's just our political structure does not even know how to acknowledge the undeconstructible, because it has to be the end in and of itself. And if we think our economic system is better, it's worse. It doesn't just deny its failures.
Right.
It insists it needs more expansion and constant growth, because that's the limits. The limits is everyone's not a fundamentalist about what it works on. Exactly. Right. And so to me, that just the notion of like, a lot of people roll their eyes at the confession of sin. I've been told we should get rid of it out of the liturgy at churches I worked at.
Sure.
But to me, that's like the most honest moment of your week, unless you got a good therapist. And our economic institutions and our political ones can't imagine a story where the most true version is admitting they haven't arrived.
Yeah.
Right. And I think part of what you describe as like one of the greatest gifts, like broad-based community organizing gives, is collective solidarity to bring to the fore in the economic sphere and in the political sphere an affirmation of the not yet, and cooperative solidarity to go, the correct thing is forgive me for I have sinned, like in this moment. Like, that's how you begin, because we have to go somewhere else. I just think like the part of the work of the people that our economic system and our political system doesn't do is ever confess its sin.
No, I mean, I think you're right on, Trip. The way that I experience it is we don't know how to lose. We just don't know how to lose. And loss, the thing is that politics is loss. I mean, let's just be pretty Augustinian here. Like, let's understand that the goods that we hold most dear in this world are frail and fallen, and everything that we love and hold most dear will pass away. Like, that's real. So then the question is, okay, so how do you lose well? And how do you then begin starting to think about how loss is collectively experienced in this world, by whom most often, whether it's forced upon in positions of tyranny and power and domination and all sorts of things. And you start to complexify that. And then you start to realize, oh shit, excuse me, like, oh my God, we don't know how to compromise. Like, we don't know how to negotiate. So all of these things, the only thing that we think we know how to do in politics is yell, say what you want without actually listening or engaging in relationships with others or negotiating or thinking strategically in the long term, because you're just thinking about the election. You're thinking about the ballot box. You think that, as opposed to thinking about how it is that we can actually strategically build power. I'm going to take a loss here in order that I can win later, because that win, the second win, is more important to me. Now, the work of confession here, I think I'm a good Presbyterian, ordained, ruling, teaching elder here. It's all about God's initiative at the very first. I am it's all about understanding a good conception of humans, that we are creations, not the creator, all sorts of things. We can understand that pretty well. God's initiative first. Call to confession is crucial here in understanding our position in the world. But it's deeply political. Confession is deeply political in that way, because that helps us properly orient the world, and orient to the world in a way that lets us actually have a worldly politics in a way that's really important. And this is the final thing I'll say about this. Oftentimes people will think the guy that I end with at the end is George Washington Woodbey. And I draw on lots of radical democratic socialists throughout the whole book, right? They're just in the footnotes more often than not. But I think what's crucial about this is that people tend to think about, when you start talking in this discourse about worldly politics, the eschatological, all of this stuff, people think that once you start thinking about democratic socialism, they're actually looking for salvation in the world. I think this is a fundamental mistake. I'm not conflating my Christian faith with socialism. I'm actually thinking, no, democratic socialism is the best enactment of my Christian faith. And I have a proper distinction between the two. And I'm not looking for salvation in the movement, and I don't think anybody actually is who's been in movements, because they know that loss is characterized it too much. People piss you off, they stab you in the back, all sorts of things. So yeah, I think this is the general problem of the electoralitis, is that we actually don't know how to lose, we don't know how to negotiate, we don't know how to compromise, we don't know how to build power, all of these things, because we don't actually know how to talk to each other and listen to each other and build relationships that can withstand strong differences.
One of the things that at the heart of it, and I think this is actually one of the gifts of the Reformed tradition, is a confident sobriety about the limits of the human.
Yeah, that's what
right?
I mean.
And someone else that captured it, like Tolkien does this in Lord of the Rings, right? Yes, there's this whole battle about the ring, right? But he talks about it as a long defeat, right? Ultimately, the ring wins. It's there's a fight between Frodo and Gollum, and the ring is its own undoing. The ring ultimately wins, but its undoing is how perverted it makes people. But when Frodo's piecing together that he has this whole task before him, and he's like, I can't believe I live in this time. And Gandalf's whole thing is it's a long defeat, son. You missed the point. You thought everything was just creams and strawberries, or I have this little thing I got to go do. He's like, you don't pick where you're born in the world. You get to decide what you do with your finitude.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
And so choose it well.
Yeah.
But don't think you're the solution. And I think so many of my friends on the more radical left side are the ones that would read Lord of the Rings and be like, so why didn't the Eagles just fly the ring to Mount Doom? Right? And they're they're the I remember being at Occupy protests, where I had thoughts on kind of intentional organizing in ways that you would think we might make specific demands or like organize the energy to particular things, and like it devolved into playing like Who's Read Foucault most recently,
Exactly. Right.
like in this kind of thing. And I feel like there's this utopian streak
That's right.
in
That's
criticism,
right. Yeah,
because it has such a high anthropology.
that's right. That's right.
And like what you just described to me is liberating, right? It's just like, no, like you and Sam are going to walk to Mount Doom and it's going to suck and you may not make it. But like, guess what? You didn't pick where you're thrown in the world, but you do get to decide whether you get to live before you die. And maybe it's the fact that you actually have some friends that all give a shit about you.
Exactly.
And let's figure it out. But,
yeah.
And don't think doing the right thing is utopia. It's still a long defeat. Like we're working with humans.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is right. I mean, I think if you think about this, like, to put it less in Tolkien terms, so this is great. I love that, like I said, so that's good.
Well, I use it to prop my computer up.
There we go.
So this is what happens when my copy of Lord of the Rings is holding my computer up. You're talking. I'm like, yeah, the long defeat.
That's right.
So, sorry.
But no, that's so real, because it's like that gives something to people to relate to, because it's like that's also a great way of talking about all the freedom fighters who came before you. They may not have. They did something. This is one way to think about it. So I was trained by the Industrial Areas Foundation, which Saul Alinsky founded in 1939, 1940, in the Back of the Yards neighborhood in Chicago. Right, there are about 4 other national broad-based organizing coalitions, and essentially what that means now, these are national networks that help prop up and support local affiliates who are broadly based organizations of organizations. So it means they have schools, unions, teachers, other unions, churches, synagogues, mosques, lots of broadly based, lots of different institutions. They're organizations of organizations, right? And they work together to bring all those organizations, all the members into theirs, around common issues and common values, that they can act together, so that you're a lot more effective in working together. And then I also draw a fair amount from like interfaith organizing work. I ran an anti-Islamophobia campaign down in the South here, for us to, based in Tennessee for about 5 to 7 years, working with Christians, Jews, and Muslims around anti-Muslim sentiment. So it's like, yeah, that I have a deep appreciation from a couple of different perspectives about the importance of having a proper perspective of the human, a low anthropology. And this is oftentimes what people forget. This is the gift that religion gives to politics, is an adequate anthropology. It gives you an understanding that even if it's a long defeat, you understand the creatures that you're dealing with. This is why, we've got to understand like how it is, why we organize in the first place. And for me, people organize to protect and fight for what they hold most dear. So I've got kids. I've got a 1-year-old, only got a 4-year-old. Trip delayed the podcast a little tonight so I can put my 1-year to bed. That's great. I really appreciate that. Thanks. Well, I also care a whole heck of a lot about the state of the schools in the city I live in, because that's where my kids are going. And why do it? Not just because I care about good schools, but because it's my son. That's why I care about it, because things that I hold most dear that are threatened and violated or like at stake in this fight. Or I care about the way that teachers are getting paid. I care about daycare and the price of daycare. Good Lord, no one knows you can pay, afford daycare nowadays. I care about healthcare because I got to pay for my kids' healthcare. All these sorts of things. I organize because of that, not necessarily because I am principled and want universal healthcare to pass. Yes, I do. I am principled in that way, but I ultimately care about it so that my kids don't have to pay for healthcare. That's really what it is. And so it is this utopian sense, this blueprint sense is a big failure of the left. And they have dismissed religion because they've thought about it as otherworldly. And instead it provides you the tools to actually organize better with the people who you're actually working with, so you can understand them better. You understand their wishes, their desires, their loves, their losses. That's what politics is about. That's the muck of it. And that's the beauty of it. So I think you're absolutely right. It is a long defeat. But because I'm reformed enough, God has graced us already, my friend. It's not, God has gifted us with a better story that we can tell, even though we're not the main characters.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you are, you don't know it.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you are the main character, you don't know it. That's like when you mention after the Tolkien aside, like, yeah, that's like, think of all the justice fighters that get mentioned. Think of all the members of the social gospel movement. And I only knew some of them. Now, my family are liberal Baptists, so Walter Rauschenbusch is like on the wall,
He's a guy, man. Yeah.
It's like we're the like Carter, King, Rauschenbusch Baptists.
That's great. Yeah.
And Clarence Jordan.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
You know, because Koinonia Farms and such. But the thing that, popped in my mind, like, of going like, yeah, like, and there are all these people's stories that if you just sit to the present, you could go like, oh, well, okay, you could either say, well, they kind of got partial fulfillment and got something here, or you could go like, well, they completely failed. And think of like all the people that have been advocating for women's rights and inclusion and stuff, and then you get a Supreme Court that's like, my bad, never mind.
That's right. Yeah.
And all these kinds of things. So like there's a different kind of perspective, I think, that comes in when your solidarity doesn't just go beyond your class, race, identity horizons, but also goes beyond both backwards, right, in time, and forwards, right? You mentioned your kids, I mentioned mine, but then like you immediately go like, you know how cool it'd be to be a grandparent?
That's right.
Like, because I've talked to my parents and they think it's even more fun than when they had me, which is hard to imagine.
I know. Well, you don't have
like
to
that's a whole new level.
Man. This is great.
It's just like all the fun, and you say yes to candy.
Exactly.
But so like there's this solidarity of depth in the present.
That's right.
But there's also like backwards and forwards. And to me, there's this, I find it fascinating how effective the American church is at ignoring this depth. Like, it literally is an institution where, like, it saints people. It puts pictures of dead people on the wall on purpose.
That's right.
It like, even the ones that aren't even sure they like the Trinity still say it at baptism.
That's right.
Because they want continuity with the whole history, right? Like, there's something about, like, when Americans in the present are increasingly divorced from an alternative calendar, an alternative identity, an alternative rhythm, and an alternative community, and it gets morphed into this kind of like smorgasbord of digitally mediated relations where your anxieties, fears, and tribalism is ramped up, where you're alienated from physical community and the people around you. And now the companies succeed by like having your phone up in your face so you don't even get to know your kids, your parents, your family, your friends, your neighbors, right? Like, you create this world where you become only the person increasingly that's separated, where it's been mediated by some place where you're the object that's being monetized.
Yeah.
Your attention's being monetized. And then we wonder, like, why we have all these problems that we've tweeted about, that there hasn't been change. And yet we've like unconsciously or without any choice opted in to the market mediating our relations by selling our attention. And the sick thing about it, right? Like, this isn't to like occasion people just to feel guilty. The sick thing about it is you don't really have an option of opting out for most people.
That's right.
That's the sick part.
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you which months I actually pay attention to social media metrics and not. Yeah. And the difference in downloads and money is significant. Like, when we as a family did Lent, where we eliminated screens that weren't shared.
Whoa.
Like, the adults were fine. Our oldest was like, I just feel like I just checked out of all my relationships with my friends. I'm like, you see them all day at school.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, I don't even know what everyone's texting about.
That's right.
Oh. Right. And then you think about everyone's business, right? Like, you have to always be growing and accelerating. Like, if you even make the same, you're behind.
Exactly.
there's a demand for constant growth,
That's right.
efficiency, acceleration. And so this isn't even the solutions personal piety and discipleship.
No.
It's like we actually need a broad-based community organizing to go, we would like a flourishing life back, and no one asked us for permission
That's right.
to get us addicted to constant growth and the monetization of our attention to amplify our anxieties, fear, and tribalism.
Yeah.
Like, who wants that? Everyone complains about the outcomes. It's kind of like you only can shop at McDonald's,
Right.
and everyone wishes they were in shape.
That's right. That's exactly
But that's
right.
what we've done with our brains.
Yeah. No, but this is so real.
Like, communal solidarity seems required.
Right. Oh, this is right. And I think it's 100% revolving around understanding what it is we're up against. And that what we face here in late modern neoliberal capitalism and racial capitalism, as I talk about it, is not just an economic order. You're facing an institutionalized social structure that is mediating every one of your relationships. And it feels and looks a lot like feudalism because it provides you with your role. It tells you how you're supposed to act, and it gives you meaning and value and affirmation, and it's attractive, it's nice, it's like makes you feel good. And it actually, I mean, the story about your eldest kid is right. I mean, this is the thing, is it's like how, because you, in order to be a good person, you have to behave in these ways, which is buying in, literally buying in and participating into that way of life. So it definitely, capitalism is deeply formative of selves and subjects. But here's part of the point too about broad-based organizing for this. It's not a Luddite approach. It's not like we don't need technology. We just need to go back to the local. If we could just have like the 19 whatever, like, I mean, it's not nostalgic, but it is grounded in an understanding that there are ways in which we can create and build solid relationships that actually prize human agency and voice, besides that don't need to be mediated. But here's the other point about it that I want to say. It's many of the advances that you see, like in democratic socialism and broad-based organizing movements, use technology and use innovation for their good end. Mediation is not a bad thing. Like, technology is not always a bad thing. It can help us and enhance our world in lots of different ways. It's not necessarily, I'm not going to say here that we can innovate our way out of climate change. That's not what I'm talking about. Like, we do need real systems change here. But it is important for us to understand that some of the places that we're actually feeling that are the most undemocratic are in your faces. Like, I was reading the cover of this book. When was the last time you voted or felt like you politically participated in anything through Facebook? Like, no, you've just participated. It's just been like, oh, like, yeah, of course. This is just how it is, right? Like, it's just Facebook. And yet or whatever, I don't know, whatever social media tool anybody's using. But I mean, it's not a political process. Democracy is not present there. It has not leveled it. It's just pulled the wool over your eyes, and so that so I think this is absolutely right. We have to understand how it is that capitalism is a social force. It's institutionalized. It forms and shapes our own senses of self. It's deeply racialized, so that race and the economy are mutually informing. You cannot disentangle the two. When you do, you start getting into games of, well, is this class-based or is this race-based? And you lose the understanding about how it is that the understandings of value and understandings of difference move together. So what you value requires differentiation scales, which then allows you to say, oh, so this is how race and capitalism merged historically at the same time. Like, yeah, like, okay, well, read the Black Marxists to understand that. Like, that's, like, I don't need to make Cedric Robertson's argument about that for you. But we can just basically understand how it was that Spanish colonialism also had its own 20 scales of racial castes here. Like, let's just play it that way.
Yeah. Do you think that part of the problem in the more left side of politics, and also I think it's a similar problem for like the impotence of largely liberal Christianity has to do with the way we've kind of culturally sabotaged spaces of solidarity. Because like part of like when I think of like the stories of the social gospel, and I've loved that Dorian, is like added to his ongoing history. Like I don't know how the guy publishes that much, but like then like doing the series like on the Black social gospel, like I didn't know a lot of that. And I'm just like, wow, like there's just continuously more stories, right? And when you think of all that process, as you read the social gospel in the past, a lot of it had to do with kind of like intentionally creating social spaces that generated solidarity. One part, right, was the leveraging of the social spaces within worshiping and confessional communities. And then part of it was organizing within leaders in these denominations and clergy groups and such, and ecumenical spaces and things. But also, like when you think of on the work side, we're just now like starting to have a growth in the labor movement again. And so like when you think of this shifting where you're just now starting to see both in religious spaces and in economic spaces a kind of like turn to finding solidarity space again, that space is different today than it was in the past, right? Like when you think of religion, like the eruption of pluralism, the growth of post-religious, people that say the multiplicity of religious traditions. And I think one of the things in your book that I found extremely compelling is to both acknowledge the present reality and someone like Michael Brooks, who I wish hadn't passed as early, like insisted, like the left has to find its soul again.
Yeah.
Right? Like to continue where the more progressive visions in the political sphere equate to a reductive materialism that leaves people burnt out utopians without solidarity, depth dimension, and animating spirit is a problem.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to like set the stage however you want, but like, I mean, you even like talk about how McIntyre goes, like, there's a problem of religious pluralism once you put it with modernity, because well, then how do you have a conversation around common goods in the present?
Yeah.
Right. So like when you think of that kind of like Michael Brooks, like where's the soul on the left, but we're doing it in a kind of radical pluralism that also recognizes a secular humanist tradition as wisdom. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And what does it look like for Christians who come in having been leaders for so long on the left, even if half the church didn't know that we had been?
So there's just small questions here, just like,
Well, that was one of Tripp's rambles for you to say whatever you want related to it.
I love it.
It's a whole chunk of your book, and I got too excited with the Tolkien aside and low anthropology to get to question 2.
Dude, it's great. No, this is real. I mean, I think this is, so one way to think about it is like, this is the value and the payoff of a concept like sacred value, which is another way of talking about what it is that you hold most dear. Things that, and so it's different than talking about the sacred. I'm not talking about God here. I'm talking about evaluative attitudes, attitudes that you take up towards goods and people in the world, and that tend to be, whether they're intrinsically, the value is intrinsic in them, it's objective, and it's inviolable. So it's like one's child is a great example of this. Like my kid, the kids, they just have value, and it's clearly not up for debate. And if you hit them, it's kind of like don't hurt them, like there's like the response of like, no, don't hurt the thing, like if you, this is part of the value is just there, because then you have that reaction, right? Like, oh my God. I mean, this is like, I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I'm like, don't mess with your brother, that sort of reaction. So I think, but what's great about this is that people of all stripes have sacred values. This is not necessarily a religious thing. certainly it shows up very often in religious traditions. And so it provides you with a rich history of, and that is a good, in a good McIntyrean sense here, a long conversation that you're going to participate in, and that you're going to have forms of reasoning around, and that you're going to do in time and space and history, right? So this is so sacred. So one way to approach the deep pluralism is for us to think about sacred values and to think in terms of value language rather than in belief language, because I think the beliefs then actually end up getting distracted from the ethics part of it, and values are always really at play in our actions. And so that's one way to kind of route that. And I think that what's important about this is that people, as I said earlier, people organize to protect and fight for things that they hold most dear, they hold sacred. People feel differently about different things. So that undeniably means that you're going to have oftentimes radical pluralism in a space that should build solidarity. But this is the problem, is that any group has often thought spaces of solidarity have tended to mean spaces of sameness. This is not the case. And this is the whole Hegelian move in it, right? Difference in the book. Difference is a deep relationship, if not perhaps one of the deepest. It's where identity starts for Hegel, right? You've got to have identity and difference to then moving into, that's what gets his dialectic off of the ground is real difference. And determinate difference, not make-believe difference, but actual difference that has a materiality that matters to you. And so if you're able to be in a group that cultivates the expression of those sorts of differences and has confidence that your relationships are strong enough to hold it, those are relationships of solidarity. Because then you understand why it is that you're in the fight and why it is that I'm in the fight, and how it is that we can stand together to fight for things that we both hold most dear, because I love and respect you and I see you as a whole person. Like that's real. I think, politics is sameness is this, and this is common throughout, and maybe any of your listeners have done anything in interfaith. Interfaith movement, has always been about what it is that we, how we hold same. What's the sameness thing? Oh, let's just go and let's plant some trees together. Oh, we care for the community together. Oh, like let's have some dialogue about how we all believe in a God. Like, that's great, except it ends up being pretty shallow, because then you actually end up, all right, well, like, what does God mean to you? What is God calling you to do? How is that to call you into different relationships with people around your lives? Yeah, like, let's think about this. Like in 2008, a good friend of mine, a Palestinian friend of mine's mosque in Tennessee was firebombed. Like, this is determinate difference is real, and it's often makes a difference to people's lives. I mean, look at the Israel-Palestine, genocide going on right now. This is stuff that is not just in ideas, and sameness is not going to cut it if you want to build deep, real solidarity. And you need to be able to have a politics that can form and build relationships that can sustain deep differences. Because without that, things will just kind of be at the beck and call. Your group relationships will be really brittle. Anybody building a congregation that asks everybody to kind of believe and act and do the same is going to have a whole lot of mini-me's, and that's not fun.
And I think that concept of sacred values is important, and you said it, but I'd like for you to pause a little bit on it, right? Because part of the predicament that happens in organizing and also in interfaith and multi-religious spaces is, there's that require for sameness. So let's get rid of all the particulars.
Exactly.
Right. And so like in a theological space, the particulars end up being that then the Christians never use the word Jesus and Christ next to each other, and these kind of things. And, or you're like, oh, we're all going up the same mountain, or like you do these things that relativize everyone. So we're all just equally wrong. Right. And I think the other element that where you see it in organizing space is where people will act like a liberal mainline Protestant, and they'll get rid of all their particulars and just find like, what's the one thing we can all agree on, and we'll work on it. And it happens to be planting a tree.
Right.
and then the market's like, great, that'll help. But the other option I think that's so frequent that on the left that in theological spaces tends to be on the right is this is the true account. So unless you are a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, with a like third wave feminist internalizing of later Judith Butler queer theory
Right.
and a strong critique of
Right.
the technological solutions to the environmental crisis,
Right.
then you're basically the equivalent of Morning Joe,
Exactly.
which I can't tell the difference between Morning Joe and, like one of the crazy, like Tucker Carlson,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Like where
Exactly.
you're just like, where they're, it's like the fundamentalists. It's like, so you don't think the earth is 6,000 years old. So basically, you're on a slippery slope to relativism and pedophilia, and you probably
Yeah.
want to marry a dog.
Exactly.
And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't understand. They're like, you don't
Well, how
believe
we
in
got
penal
there.
substitutionary atonement, so you're not a biblical Christian. And so, like, when you think of this, like, let's all get together for sameness and don't do anything, or unless you're as orthodox, be it politically or theologically,
That's
I
right.
can't work with you.
Yeah.
Describe that sacred values framework, because I think it actually gives the possibility for genuine difference and genuine cooperation and solidarity,
Right.
right? Without having to be someone other than yourself.
Yeah. No, I think this is crucial. I mean, but it's related to what you were talking about earlier, and the fact of like with Tolkien, going back, like this is a long defeat. It's about a proper anthropology. It's about politics as loss. It's about understanding compromise and negotiation. That the left has not learned how to lose well in this way, or the right certainly hasn't, or I don't really know, but just I'm more familiar with leftist circles, and so yeah, it ends up being this sort of purity test, which is it's just bad politics. So I think that what I try to do in the book is present examples from my own experience organizing that complicate the story of religion and politics and sort of muddy the waters in terms of this purity test. Like, I'm not interested in who's the most radical, because that's just not, because what I'm really interested is getting into the messy work of building, of people, encouraging people to build power grounded in their faith. And that's messy, right? Because power is not easy to build. Power is building relationships. It's building the capacity to make things of significance happen. Right? These are real things. One of the example I talk about oftentimes about public, or one of the central examples of the book is there's a public encounter between two members of faith communities that vastly disagree around sacred values, and one member ends up like facing this challenge of whether he decides to publicly sacrifice his relationship with the group and stand in solidarity with his community, or whether he screws his community over and stands in solidarity with the group. And he chooses his community because he's a religious leader. He says no, like and based on my interpretation of this issue, like this is how things ought to go. But I think that what's sad about that is that, and what's real about this is that broad-based organizing coalitions, this is part of the core of the argument, I think they've adopted this sameness approach, is because they think that the issues that most often materialize the sacred values are the ones that are most provocative. Abortion, marriage equality, BLM, Black Lives Matter, racial justice, death penalty, sort of stuff. These things for them are not winnable. They're not winnable because they fracture the group. People feel strongly about them, and so you're going to get people leaving the group and going all over the places. So it's better to say, let's pick something that's winnable. Plan a tree trip. That's winnable. Like, that's going to be the easy thing to do. That's going to win. And that's just giving a pretty, like, obviously you can scale up and you can still get pretty powerful through sameness. Like, let's just be real. You can do it. But I think in one way or another, these differences are going to show up in real ways. Why? Because people organize to protect and fight for what they hold most dear. It's the sacred values that propel them into the fight in the first place. That's why they're there. So if you allow for the reality that the organizing has to be value based, and you're going to build relationships around how it is that people feel deeply and differently about different things, then you have relationships that are strong enough that can withstand the difference, to then expand your political horizon beyond sameness, to then actually have for differences that can be politically expressed and politically enacted on. And then you have a robust pluralism. Then you have, then you actually have a value pluralism that is politically expressed. And the final thing to say about this is that it is really true that I am like, yeah, I mean, the epistemology and philosophy that undergirds this is like social pragmatism. I'm not so much interested in debating whether things are true or not. I'm much more interested in thinking about how it is that ideas are tools, and watching the role that truth plays in our discourse. So fallibility, contingency, and revision are just the hallmarks of my epistemology and pragmatic and philosophy here. And theology, I could get it wrong, so I'm going to revise it. I have a low anthropology. Yeah, I'm sinful, so I'm gonna make a mistake. This is politics, though. You engage in it. You test things out. You correct yourself. You do it again. An adequate leftist politics of sacred value cannot be a blueprint model, and it cannot be a who's the most radical, who's the most oppressed. It's gotta be, we need to build power. We need everyone here, because what we're up against is destroying our world and ourselves and each other. And in order to do that, we need to build relationships that can hold difference. So you can't have a purity test, and it can't be, this is the way to do it, or because that's just not how it's gonna work.
I know a lot of the clergy that listen, especially those in more mainline Protestant context, will be nodding their head and then thinking to themselves, yeah, well, still like 30% of my congregation votes Republican.
Exactly.
And
Sure.
then the critical mass of a lot of them, it like mainline Protestantism, despite like if you only talk to their academics, it's different.
Yeah.
But if you talk to the congregations, the clergy that show up at a congregation, it's very different. There's a big mod vibe in mainline Protestantism.
Yeah.
They love moderation.
Of course.
They love being moderate.
Yeah.
They like hot takes that cost them very little, and that's why I think in like especially like white mainline Protestant circles, they're more likely to put up like a rainbow flag than say anything the Pope has said about the environment or the economic system.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so you like identity politics, like even the Methodists now, right?
Yeah.
They're like edgier than the Pope. But if you ask them about climate change or the undoing of solidarity in global solidarity of humanity because of the economic system, the Pope would get his junk fired at half the disciples of Christ, UCC, Episcopal, Lutheran, Methodist churches.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so like knowing that and having facilitated groups like that you're doing in the solidarity circles and things, what kind of advice or wisdom do you have for faith leaders who want to kind of take that framework of sacred values and not like try to like preach people into submission to ideas they might have all these defense mechanisms around, but like invite them into solidarity, where then the relationships become kind of the fertilizer for their theological imagination?
Yeah, I mean, but this is the beauty, and this is part of why I wrote this book, is because I found and had conversations with so many organizers who said, organizing is my church. And so some organizing practices are religious practices. These are expressions of our faith, even of moderate folks. So like, let's think of the two examples that I give you. The relational meeting, the one-to-one, which is a public, intentional conversation that's value-focused and value-directed around what people care about and what they're willing to do to protect and fight for them. And the listening campaign is when an institution or organization takes a concentrated period of time to do relational meetings to really listen to each other. So you do about 50 or 60 relational meetings over like 6 to 8 weeks in your own congregation. You realize what it is what did you hear? What did you listen to? What did you discover? The argument is that hopefully you discovered that the Spirit is reweaving your congregation, is deepening these relationships, strengthening the bonds, helping you discover new ways of being the church and how it is that God is calling you into deeper relationship with each other and then out into the public. It is this sort of spiral movement, inward and then outward. The inward is really important. This is not a book that says, go get a bullhorn and get out in front of City Hall right away. One, because City Hall's not going to care. But the second point is like, if you can do the hard work of organizing about, 60 congregations across your town for, the next 2 years, and then you can get 2,000 people out in front of the city, great. That's power. And it's the whole process of that. It's not just the 2,000 people in front of it. It's the fact that you actually spent the time to build the relationships and genuinely listen to each other. So here's a classic example of the benefit and the payoff of this. Oftentimes people think that if you do a listening campaign, take an intentional set of period of time to actually train people, 10 people to do, listening sessions, relational meetings in your congregation. And I give you an example in the book about how one church that I work with incorporated it into their liturgy, did it right directly after the baptism. So this is a response to the word. Again, good Reformed theology and liturgy here, showing us how it is that the Spirit is moving. And, and so then they took, 3 months to do this, and it ended up really, the argument here is that it strengthens churches. Organizing builds strong churches. But that doesn't necessarily mean that strong churches are the ones that are the most provocative. One church that I know that did this decided just to rip up the red carpet because they weren't proud of it, and they needed to change their red carpet. That's great. That's action. These are things that you can start where you are. It's not about asking to be people people they might be 2 or 3 years down the road. Meet them where they are right now. Engage them what they care about and why it is they care. Heck, Trip, I come from Kansas. When people think about Kansas, what do they usually think about? They either think, in my experience, two things. One is that it's flatter than a pancake. That's true. It's really plains. Yeah. The other thing they really think about Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas? And they think about why it is.
College basketball.
Or college basketball. That shows more about me than it does about you. That's true. My whole family went to KU.
I'm from North Carolina, so that's the other state that loves college basketball.
I don't know if we can deal with this anymore. This is true. I forgot about this. It's okay. I didn't go to KU, so we can let this one slide. But my brother and sister and mom and dad and uncles, everyone else did. But this is the thing, is that people think that moderates, Republicans are voting, are duped into voting. They're idiots. They're not voting. Get to know them, learn their story, listen to them, right? And then actually be engaged in thinking about how it is they love their children. So how do you build power with them, right? How do you engage that? Right? I'm not saying that you're going to, now this is the case. I got a friend who says, now, Aaron, are you telling me that I need to get to know a Nazi? No. Like, let's draw some lines here. White nationalists, fascists, let's be real about the threats. But let's also be real about the opportunities.
Well, and I think there's a piece under that often gets overlooked, especially for leaders who feel like they aren't making a difference, is, let's say you do the one-to-one conversations, the kind of listening campaign, and you get to a decision, and it begins with changing carpet, right? But yet what you just did is tell them, like, one, their voices matter, it makes a difference, and collective agency does something. And
yes.
so,
Trip,
and if you if you read the freaking Gospels, like, one of my reasons I love the Gospel of Luke is it reiterates this point where Jesus sends out the 12 in pairs, and is like, I'm going to tell you to do all the same Greek verbs I've been doing up to this point. And they come back like, I didn't work. Right. So then he gives them a little more like one-on-one intention here, trying to like work out with the core group. Then he sends out 70 to go do it.
Yeah.
Right. And then at the beginning of Acts, I guess he ascended and showed back up. But, but then he's like, well, y'all need to do another 40-day intensive. And it says he does 40 days explaining the kingdom of God to him again. And it says, you just wait for the Holy Ghost because, look, I tried to send you. This junk ain't working right. Look, I just conquered sin, law, and death. So come on. Y'all just wait for the Holy Ghost. And then you have like the whole book of Acts.
That's right.
Are all these verbs that were the Spirit and then in Jesus, and then they're embodying it. And so, like, when we're a utopian or when we have to be the most radical at any one point in time to count it as a win, right? Like, then you miss that sometimes the most liberating thing you do is let people know that they have a voice, they can be heard, that their agency can make a difference. And if it can make a difference in one space, that a community that's postponed changing something forever, it goes like, no, like we did this together. So now what else are we going to do?
That's right.
And I bet you care about your grandkids.
That's right.
And, and so I feel like, okay, so if I was going to preach your book, so
yeah, do it.
I don't usually, but, okay. So you talk about listening campaigns. So this is it, like this kind of like intensely relational, which even a good therapist will tell you, like half the job is not flinching and listening and staying connected, right? Like, it's amazing what humans do when they know they matter.
Right.
And taken seriously. And then like the work on relational meetings, here's what I'd do. I think I would do a sermon series, and it would be called like the Solidarity Space for the Kingdom. Week 1, it's all on like when 2 or 3 are gathered, right? This is the personal meeting thing. And you just basically go like, and you're like, this sermon series, y'all are crazy. Y'all are always asking like, what's up with like, where's the resurrected Christ? Jesus named 3 places he promised to be. So this sermon series is just called Practicing Resurrection.
There you go.
And Solidarity Space number 1 is when 2 or 3 are gathered. And I dare you to find one or 2 other people, and y'all just tell the complete truth about yourself for 30 minutes each, not flinch, and tell you that still you can't say anything that will make you less than the beloved of God. And I promise to give a shit about whatever you say, right? Like you do that one. The next one, you're like, did you know that when we gather at the table, what we're doing? Right? Yeah. It might be historically like performing a meal of a political actor that was executed and could appear based on the language at that time to seem like that you're rehearsing sedition. But it's also a gift that's offered to whoever's there, including the denier and betrayer. And those are the very people who get the invitation, right? Like, so you use that. And then the third one is like, where else did Jesus promise to be? Like in the least of these. And then, so like you can go right from that, like space of just like 2 or 3 are gathered to then when you gather, do it this way. And who's included.
That's right.
And, for you and I, the Judas might have orange hair.
Yeah.
And they may not choose to receive, and they may choose to betray, but like, it's not our table, right? Like, and we also know people that think of us that way.
Yeah.
Right. And so like the commitment to solidarity is a commitment to an enactment, not a destination.
Yeah.
And in both like throughout the description, right? Like of both listening campaigns and relational meetings. And you can see it, I think, if you did right the right sermon series, 2 or 3, table, and then the least of these, like, and you're like, well, Jesus told us where he's going to be, so are we going to be there? Yeah. And by the time you get to the last one, right, that's where you'll find out who's the most interested.
That's right.
Like in joining the group that's part of the solidarity circle or whatever.
That's right.
But like those are just all 3 spaces within the Gospels that the presence of Christ is promised, and it just fits right over what you're describing, matches the ecclesiology at the end. So if I was,
thank you. That's my suggestion
if I was going to have like 3 sermons in my back pocket.
I'd go to that church. I'd go to that church.
All right, so I have 2 random questions.
Good. Yeah.
And I got to 2 of my 8 questions, but these ones were going to be at the end, but I mostly want to just know what you think.
Yeah.
These are
sorry,
trips.
maybe I blabbed on too long. Sorry.
No, you didn't. You didn't. This is what happens when I get excited is I talk more.
Well, no, I want you to, because
I know,
the people want to hear you, Trip. Let's be real about it.
Well, they should go buy the book, because there's some other questions about the book that I didn't get to. But
let's do it.
All right, here's Tripp's personal predicament in the present
Yeah.
that this book occasions. So, okay, we just had a bipartisan consensus to fund a bunch of crap for killing people.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so there's that. I mean, I have a lot of critical thoughts about the military-industrial complex in general. I find it completely fascinating that on the Sunday shows, whoever the Republican was that went around was able with a straight face and not get corrected that Biden has cut military spending,
Right.
even though I didn't know America did that,
Yeah,
and it hasn't happened. But like when it goes to foreign policy, short of him getting out of Afghanistan, it's increasingly embarrassing and problematic, though I don't think the other option's any better.
Yeah.
But it's so frustrating. And yet, like, if it hadn't had any of this, if the foreign policy embarrassment was he left Afghanistan and the others said they were going to and didn't, I'd be like, yeah, it was going to be ugly. Right. Shouldn't have gone there to begin with.
Yeah.
I would have been making the case right now that the way Biden has ran his relationship to labor is better than any of the presidents since I've been alive. And both like in the legal side, in the supporting of organizing side, and the way he funds things in the government. Like there's so many reasons to go, like if you just cared, if class analysis mattered to you, and you just wanted to know, did my vote help the poorest citizens of my country? Like I had like a nice little run sheet I was going to use, right, to my much more left friends.
Yeah.
If they live in a swing state.
That's right.
If they don't, I don't care. But like, what do you, when you think of, like, when you're thinking both like as a social ethicist and you're looking at this like election, and the first person basically since Reagan to take labor's side in some specific ways, and continuing Reagan's legacy for like moralizing the world about the international order, while taking advantage of it behind a wall, but streaming it to your Twitter platform.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to do about this. And like, what goes through your head? You're a social ethicist. See, I like philosophical theology and dead Germans.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I do too, but but I also care about it, how they can help us act, right? Yeah. No, yeah. I do too. Yeah. This is the question. And this is, I think, a really important question around, it's a hard one. It's so hard, I think, for me, because it's, I don't know. Like, I think it's just, one loses either way. And one loses, I think one has to be able to feel about and think about losing in a way that sets you up to make strategic wins going forward. So I think that in certain ways, the Biden administration has been huge losses, and that even in some of his support for labor, he was the one who broke the train strike. And so it's a train operator strike. It's not a clean cut either way. I think one of the things that I'm consistently, and this is one of the wonderful things about broad-based organizing, is it provides you with handholds. I think national elections in this way are oftentimes, even if you are in a swing state, like it's hard to feel like your voice matters. And what I am more curious about is how do we build scales of power that can help us construct transitionary structures away from where we are. So I'm curious about, local state strategies. And I'm super curious. I'm super excited about a UAW, a Volkswagen factory in Chattanooga unionizing this past week. That's a huge win. That's the first union of automated factory outside of the big three to organize in the South since the 1940s. This is huge. So, and it's failed a couple of times. So this is a fight, right? This is also the thing too, I think, is being patient. So you were talking about this, so maybe I'm kind of working myself into a proper answer to your really, I think, a difficult question. Clearly, I'm kind of fraught by it, right? Because I don't see either ways. Good. I think I think the DNC is a really fallen structure. And I'm a card carrying DSA member. Like let's build power that way. That's great. I think two-party partisan politics is a whole nother beast here, right? However, if we think then about the 200-year present, so one of the international peace builders thinks about 200-year present, which is the fact that you're always operating or creating change in a time that's been influenced by the previous two generations and the forthcoming next two generations. So always thinking about the 200 years present, 200 years back, 200 years forward. And so we're always thinking about time in a more spacious way, and how it is that you can begin to build local structures and local power in order that can actually make a real difference. I think that's why I think about like the potential possibility in fallen figures. I think Kansas state politics is a really great example of this. Like the previous governor's election was a really good example of this. It's not like the current governor is really great, but it was better than the other option. And there are ways in which you can win now under the current administration in state politics that you can't in other ways. And I think that can carry up into things. I mean, I think about things like the Build Back Better. These are huge things that are big wins for that can make strategic maneuvers. So I think there are ways for left and progressive politics in ways that are certainly tainted.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think this is the challenge then of like purity. It is. I think it does come down to this sort of personal thing. Are you able to, for those on the left, are we able to vote for someone who funds genocide? And then also on the other hand, though, too, like, I mean, but just then look at the political landscape, look at the options, what are valuable, what are actually the viable ways of building power for, the next two generations.
Yeah. And part of it, I mean, this current moment, like, is a bit weird to me in the sense that what's happening in Israel-Palestine was already happening in multiple other places on the globe with our weapons and with our military bases or people that are private contractors that are ex-military doing stuff we want. Like it wasn't a new thing, right? Like,
yeah.
So as someone that I'm probably a pestering relationship with their congressperson about this, like I was personally surprised that this one, like I'm sitting there going like, you realize how many places we're currently doing the same thing all the time?
Yeah.
Like, or have historically for years, like basically since like the last 70 years, we've been torturing Haiti.
Exactly. Yeah. Haiti's a great example. Yeah.
We have sabotaged the agricultural system of half of Central America and funded and trained hitmen.
Yeah.
And who like did mass death.
Yeah.
Like anyway, I just find it wild.
Yeah.
The shocking thing to me was like the number of friends who all of a sudden had moral energy this time, and I just was like, I've been uncomfortable about this for years, but this is just called America. Like when when earlier when you talked about having a low anthropology, some of my more progressive friends, I just thought like, but you were sleeping okay for a while, and we've been like the only thing different about this is I think that you were like it was on your screen more because America does this junk. This is just how we roll.
Yeah. This is right.
And so like that's been weird to me. Part of internalize like the long defeat or like a lower anthropology and all these things is at some point the critical movements also have to be honest about the actual situation.
Yeah.
right. And you would think when somehow the only thing that can get Washington to work is throwing a bunch of crap together so that we can fund a war with Israel and Palestine, one in Ukraine and Russia, set up stuff in Taiwan, and force through the ability to spy on our citizens with extended powers. That's the bipartisan consensus.
Right. Exactly.
Like, isn't that nuts?
Oh
Like,
no, yeah. It's
like anyway,
No, I mean, I think this is real. I think I mean, this goes back to your whole thing about the church's amnesia. Like we just have a problem with kind of remembering that it's like, oh yeah, like remember El Salvador? Remember how we funded that war in El Salvador? Oh yeah, Guatemala. Oh yeah, like yeah. Oh yeah, like those are deep massacres too. Like and so it is like but I think that this is like we can only hold so much, right? Like especially, and so it's kind of like it is people kind of picking and choosing how much pain they're willing to actually like hold. Now I do think it's like qualitatively it's a little different here, like because it's Palestine is people we're kind of waking up to already that it's apartheid conditions and kind of like seeing that in different ways. And I think also Israel, I mean, this is why religion matters plays such a huge role in people's religious imagination, such a huge role in a way that's confusing at times because there's lots of Palestinian Christians. It's kind of like that's what's going on, so it's kind of like there's just a lot of things that are kind of confusing about that. But I do think that, like, yeah, it is there. There's a sense of being amnesiac, and I think that this is partly for me. The immediate thing is like, yeah, the slow welcome to the reality of how the United States at the global level has ushered democratic discourse for a military empire industrial complex is real. And that's an ugly story. Now, I don't want to be like so depressing here. I may have a low anthropology, but I hope that the book gives people hope that they can do something. So
well, I find high anthropologies depressing.
there you go.
Like,
good. Yeah,
because they're just so far from my own
reality.
self-understanding of
Exactly.
myself that
Yeah,
then I tend to think I'm in like at least like the top 70% of human beings when it goes to
that's right.
like basic moral fiber. Like
You're a good
I'm,
person, Trip.
like and I'm not that as optimistic about myself or my ability to even like love the people I love the most well, right?
It's real though.
Like with a little bit of self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
then the idea that we're going to do it at scale en masse,
Yeah.
you know. But
Well, yeah.
the last 3 or 4 years, I've reread lots of Reinhold Niebuhr and
I was wondering
hadn't
if you're
for
gonna
a
do
long
that.
time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I read him for qualifying exams, but
Right. But
he's
this is,
shown
I
back
mean,
up.
this is what's so amazing about this, and about your point about Niebuhr is that when I was at Union, I took a seminar on Niebuhr, and Cohn taught it. And so James Cohn, one of saying in this class, one of his favorite books is The Irony of American History. And this is, yeah, I think there are aspects of, yeah, you get the like 32, moral man and moral society, but then you also maybe you get children of light, children of darkness. Then once you get like the irony of American history, then you actually see how piercing uh, Niebuhr can be in this way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to do a hagiography here, but I do think that Niebuhr, maybe it was his Lutheran theology that provided him with a pretty good sense of the human that allowed him to be pretty perceptive. And maybe it also was helped that he was a German immigrant and grew up not speaking English and went to Yale. And then, as he said, felt like a mongrel among thoroughbreds, right? Like, so I think he has some experiences here to draw from an understanding of real human nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that
Mm.
one of the shifts in mainline religion that hasn't been explored is the impact is like Niebuhr's generation's the last generation of clergy where like their primary allegiance was not to a denomination as its American identity,
Yeah.
right? Like a large number of them grew up in like attached to, oh, this is a German Lutheran, blah blah blah, like this kind of thing.
This is where it's like,
And
yeah, like Sherwood Eddy, the YMCA, like this is the whole point about the social gospel movement. It has actually provided you with structures of building global understandings. Like I think nowadays it's all mediated. So I think you're absolutely right. I think but that didn't just come about. People had to build it, right? Sorry, I'm nerding out there.
Well, yeah, but because the impact of it, of mainline Protestants when they became primarily American denominations as opposed to right where the National Council of Churches was the mediating place even between like Swiss German Lutherans,
exactly
is then the denominational identity was after World War II is very much grounded as denominations that are American.
That's right.
And within 2 generations, when you get to the, peak of mainline Protestantism, that's when mainline Protestantism became the managerial class's religion.
That's right. Well, and I think this is Ted Smith's recent book on this, The End of Theological Education, does a really good job kind of like excavating and doing a good genealogy of how it is that clergy kind of fooled themselves into coming to believe that they were into a profession, right? That would be durable in this way. But I think it's so important to like think about how it is that the identity then of these denominations gain a sense of being Americanized at the same time that you get with the evolution of neoconservatives and neoliberalism. I mean, you get that same movement of that American identity around the same time you getting Tina. There is no alternative, and so things are moving together here in the political discourse, and this is like the old left falling apart and the new left emerging. This is when you get the emergence then of the DSA and the emergence then of Michael Harrington inventing the term neoconservatives, all revolving around the same confluence of anti-communism and then losing the anti-communism as an adequate voice, as an adequate form of marginalization, then having to find a new threat for democracy. This is huge.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Is there something you think I should make sure you say? Because we'll just have to talk again at some point because I only got through the top third of my
dude. Let's keep on talking about it. I would love this
topic sheet.
What are your other questions here? Just list them off.
Oh, well, one, I wanted to talk about Solinsky for people who only know the boogeyman stuff, but I thought that'd be a fun way of like talking about community organizing.
Let's do it.
I wanted to talk about like your own experience of what cooperation looks like without kind of a confessional base, and then what have you learned in helping people that come out of confessional spaces?
Good.
Like, how does that sacred values concept do it? And you tell some really cool stories, and I thought, oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
When people think democracy is more than a political space, in the American context, what does kind of like economic democracy look like? How have y'all started working on it?
Great. Yeah.
Right. With the work with the solidarity circles and such.
Yeah.
Like I had a whole historical detour on the social gospel and some of the people you mentioned. Yeah. How inverting imagination back to the local over the national.
Yeah.
The ecclesiology stuff at the end, like liturgy, work of the people, framing. I wanted to talk about what is it like to think of organizing as the experiential site of theological reflection. So like Moral Monday movement, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, like these kind of movements, if you think from there, when you think sacred values, communities of sacred values, like as a theologian of culture and sorts, what are the anxieties and questions being revealed there? And like, how do you take them seriously? What are the gifts of your tradition to think about it? What have you learned from others?
Yeah.
I would probably end up ranting about the way so-called progressive managerial class people weaponize identity politics to avoid class solidarity.
Yeah.
And it would have been about a 6-minute question that wasn't a question why Tripp vented.
That's great.
And then said, so what do you think about that?
People need to hear that though. That's
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if there was any other way Cornel West's presidential campaign could get worse. Because as someone that's friends with a lot of organizers, I don't think you trust any of them. And so I thought
I got a
there's
friend who's
that.
doing a lot of events with him over this past week in LA, and it was, I don't know, man. I can tell you stories about stuff.
No, you don't have to answer these questions. This is just what I was saying.
I know, right? Yeah. Oh,
You, I make my little I go through the book and then I go back through and then I start leaving my notes for the things I thought were fun.
yeah.
And then we got to my first two bullet points because I got distracted. This
That's
is
great. I mean, I did too. These are great questions. I love it. Let's keep talking. I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to do anything and everything. I really enjoy this. This is good stuff.
well those that are listening, also you should want to go get the book and such. But also if you have questions, maybe any of the ones I have on my list
Yeah.
we didn't get to, or related ones, feel free to hit us up. I think there's clickbait if you just title an episode about how Saul Alinsky is a saint,
Let's do it.
or something that just is
That's right.
oh, and the inverted version of Glenn Beck's whiteboard about him.
That's right. Well, this is the thing, though, too, is he dedicates Rules for Radicals, I think, to Satan. So it's like Saul Alinsky, Satan, the devil, or a Satan, or a saint. I don't know. I'm down for that, though. We should talk about it.
I know it. That's just one of those this quality clickbait.
That's right.
You know
it.
you come to get triggered, but then you find out Jesus is inviting you
That's right.
to the three places he promises to be for the solidarity spaces for the resurrected Christ. It's when two or three are gathered and at the table and with the least of these, and that may or may not cohere to high quality broad-based community organizing principles. And once you recognize, like Paul, that the greatest commandment, you could say love God and love others, but he just says it's love others.
That's right.
And that's because sacred values are more important than confessional boundary maintenance.
Amen. Amen.
And he talked to the resurrected Christ, so it's above my pay grade to disagree with him.
That's right. That's right. Above the pay grade. That's so real.
I've had a few friends, but they was psychedelically induced, and so I don't. I had a very vivid dream once where me and Reinhold Niebuhr were talking, and Jesus showed up, but he looked like Bob Marley.
That's good. I love it.
And I wrote about it for PhD application essay that it didn't go well. I thought it was rather entertaining. I didn't get into that one.
Depends on where you applied there. I don't know. It depends on how they feel about Niebuhr.
Yeah,
how they feel.
They apologized later. They were like, well, if I'd known.
If I know it was you, Trip.
Yeah, well, my name was on it.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, that's real. Yeah. Oh my God. No.
Well, the last thing though, you should we've mentioned solidarity circles a few times.
Yeah.
But what is it? And people can look forward to hearing more about it at camp and such. But,
amen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is great because it's, as we've been talking the last, for this, hour and a half here, it's just been a real joy. But it's kind of revolved around the current moment, but also some of the crises that clergy are facing. And one of those that they're facing, honestly, is one way that I put it is that you are over-resourced in terms of Bible studies and toolkits, and you are under-connected in terms of relationships of peers who want to create and sustain change in their communities. And there's a dearth of laboratories of social change where you can actually dig in, ground your social change work in theology, and figure out how it is you can actually practically implement that. So we developed this about 3 years ago when I held 5 focus groups with about 100 clergy and heard this need. And so we created it. It's a 9-month leadership training program that's virtual. We meet monthly for 90 minutes. It's competency-based. We provide you with some community organizing practice, some labor organizing practices, active listening, relational meeting, storytelling as a narrative for social change. And then we also give you some basic theological and biblical interpretation lenses too. So we ground it in grounded in theology and scripture. And you're with a group of about 10 to 15 other peers from across the country and world who are in congregations or in organizing institutes or organizations or in community organizations, and you really kind of approach this work together. One of the participants calls this sort of relational ministry. It's a chance to really kind of like feed each other in this work. We ground all the work in your context. So every conversation we have monthly is grounded in a case study that's generated by the participants. So we're really looking to surface what it is, the operating concepts and questions that people have and bring to the table so that we can move them in it. And that's the idea. We're creating a national network, an international network of clergy, faith leaders, and organizers who are interested in connecting their institutions to the solidarity economy. And the solidarity economy is a fancy way of thinking about how it is that we can build an economy that's grounded in alternative values than the current capitalist, extractive and exploitive and expropriative one, right? But instead grounded in questions of democracy, of worker ownership, or values of democracy and worker ownership and accountability and cooperation. Just think about the difference it makes when a church thinks about its projects, the community projects, in terms of charity versus mutual aid. That's the start that we're thinking about. What if let's build from that. So yeah, we're launching the recruitment for the next step. Applications are open. Reach out to me if you want to be a part of it. Go to religionandjustice.org. That's our website. Apply there. Yeah, we'll be at camp. Jorg is gonna give a talk. Hopefully, I'll give a talk, and then we'll do some solidarity workshops, which will be. That's where you get to learn the touch and the feel of this. What it's actually like to experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for hanging out, Aaron.
Yeah.
And looking forward to getting to do it again.
Yeah, man. I love it. Thank you.
All right. Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the episode. Well, you know what that means? That means you're awesome. You know what all the cool kids do like yourself? They share the brew, because the best brew is a shared brew. So share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. If you love it, if you dig it, or if you go, whoa, I got a question I'd like to engage, then you should head over to the Substack. That is the easiest place to interact, reflect, connect, meet other people, send me your questions and feedback. And also, if you love it and you want to make it possible, then go to homebrewedcommunity.com and you can find the ways to support the podcast, connect with community, and get access to over 45 plus classes we've done over the years. If you want to hang out in person, then come to Theology Beer Camp, October 17th and 19th in Denver, Colorado. theologybeer.camp. That's the URL. Come on out and nerd out with your geek out in the flesh.